Georgia. Tell me about Macon, Georgia. I don't want to hear about your case yet. I just want you to tell me about Macon, Georgia.
I moved to Macon, Georgia in December of '80. And when I moved here to Macon, Georgia, my experience that it was a little slow, but I liked it. From Atlanta. Okay. I'm originally from South Carolina, Holly Hill, South Carolina. Okay. But when I moved to Macon and I got to know a few people here, I realized that the mentality here about how blacks move up or how blacks get out and involve themselves into the neighborhood or into the city was just totally different from what I had been exposed to. I moved to North Macon when I first moved here, and there was very few blacks that lived out in that area. But anyhow, as the years went on, as I lived here in Macon, I applied for jobs, and sometimes I looked around and I was the only black applying for that job. And a lot of times I knew I was qualified for the job, but of course I didn't even get offered the job. But then as years went on, I learned that, to me, the mentality of the blacks that were from Macon was like they have been criticized and kept down, like you can't achieve, you can't go, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't get this job because you're black, you can't live in that area because you're black. But I was never told that, you know. If I was always brought up, you were just as good or better than anybody else. But like I said, I learned that the mentality here of the blacks was like they were afraid to move on up, and it shouldn't have been that way.
Is it kind of like institutional inferiority? Has it just been institutionally ingrained in them that
yes.
they're inferior?
Yes.
What?
Yeah, I think because of what has happened, especially for me to hear about a mayor that they had here named Machine Gun Ronnie. Machine Gun Ronnie. Was it Ronnie? Mm-hmm, yeah. And about how blacks had to be, they had a curfew, they had to be off the street at a certain time. And I couldn't believe when somebody was telling me that this was going on at one time. I couldn't believe that. That blacks were so scared that they listened to this person when they paid their taxes, and you know their money was being spent in this town. You know that you had to listen at somebody saying that you had to be in your house at a certain time. I didn't think such a thing exists. I heard about slavery years ago, but you would think it doesn't exist anymore. But in Macon, Georgia, the mentality of the blacks, like I say, is like they were still in slavery time. You know, they were afraid to step up and make a voice and be heard.
You got to a point where it was either fight or flight.
That's right.
Because one of your children was killed in this town. Now I want you to tell me about that and why you chose to fight rather than just flee.
I chose to fight because no one has the right to take someone's life unlawfully. And worse yet, I've learned that blacks are most of the time overcharged for crimes. And a lot of times they don't know. But here in Macon, it's like they tell you, well, you can't fight, you can't do anything, you can't go against the law here. And it's like, well, you know, if they say you did this, that's the way you're going to be charged. But I learned from dealing with the issue with my son and an issue I had that blacks are overcharged.
Okay.
And
what happened to your son?
He went to report. He was on probation. He went to report October the 10th of 2000. For a charge, he was charged with possession with intent. That was overcharged. He never should have even been charged with possession with intent because he was not found guilty of it. But how he got there, an officer, Duncan Matthews, which I questioned, they took his name and put it on statements that he didn't make. And our officer that was downtown showed me the paperwork. And I said, well, this is not his original signature. These statements he didn't make. And how I knew that, when my son, they had him incarcerated. It's just a long story. When he first was charged, they made him do like a month in jail. They let him out. Then he was just walking the street one day, and they locked him up and kept him in jail, wouldn't even let him out, and told him that he had to plead guilty to something. So which he did. He said, Mama, he said, I'm tired of being in here. That was in February. So he pleaded guilty to a lesser charge, possession with intent. But they were trying to charge him with, like I say, a higher charge. But anyhow, he stayed in jail from February to August. But anyhow, when years went by, that was in '96. And you would think, well, okay, he's doing pretty good. He was already kind of upset because he was already overcharged. He found out he was overcharged. Okay. Instead of just letting him be on probation and just report, they say they were going to put him on intense probation. And he was not a violent person. We never understood why they put him on maximum, in matter of fact, I think it was maximum intense probation, in which probation officer had to come out to his house and check on him after 7. He had to be in the house at 7. This person that they put him up under was Roger Stembridge, who we found out to be very abusive and seemed to be a very hating person. This man would come 1 o'clock in the morning, knocking on the door with a flashlight, waking up everybody in the house, and then tell you if you come to the door with your house coat on, you had to have your clothes on. Very abusive.
Did you ever report his behavior and attitude?
I reported his behavior because I think less than 3 months after they put my son, they put him on 6 months intense probation. About 3 months after that, he proclaimed my son was positive for marijuana. My son denied it, and he was like, Mama, which he said, in which of course he used to, but it's like, this man, Mama, this man is so mean. He's like, I can't do that anymore. I said, well, you do whatever it takes for you to come off of that. I said, because you're just as good as that person, that same person that's accusing you. I said, you're just as good as he is. So anyhow, I called to Atlanta to complain about him because I went to pick my son up one day when I took him to report. He had him outside sleeping the front of the office. He was outside sleeping doing the landscaping. Well, I thought it was wrong because I knew my son had quit smoking weed. He's like, Mom, I quit, and I know him. He's a very truthful person, especially to me. And I said, well, my son stopped smoking marijuana. I said, when he met Roger Stembridge, he was a reign of terror. And his choice was, Mom, I got to come out from under this man. So he chose, I'm going to do what's right. He was already upset and mad because he got charged with a crime that he was not, it wasn't never proven, alleged. Possession with intent. Well, anyhow, of course, they said he was doing his job. That was 3 months later. Okay, another 3 months, he thinking he's coming off his 6 months intense. He went to report. Again, Roger Stembridge tested him and said he was positive for marijuana. That day, I guess my son just had enough. He'd handcuffed him behind his back with some hinge handcuffs. And was getting ready to take him to jail, I was told, and my son took off running, and he and some other officers chased him down to the river. October the 10th of 2000. That was around maybe between 2:30, 3 o'clock, no later than 4. About 6:25, Roger Stembridge came to my door to tell me that my son escaped. He was in handcuffs. He had him handcuffed behind his back, and he escaped. And he was getting ready to leave, he and some other officers. And he said, can I search your house? And I said, yeah, he's not here. I know he's not here. I said, you don't have to be in till 7. And he is always home at 7. So he walked through the house, didn't look in any rooms, came back out, you know, asked Steve, if you're in here, come out. I mean, just, he shined a light in the bathroom. I mean, you only look in one room. You got a whole house here. You know, you got 8 rooms or more in the house. You only look in one room, the bathroom. And as he was getting ready to leave, he turned back around and told me, well, if he comes home, you know, tell him he got to turn himself in. And he left. Never heard from him again. My other son and I, Craig, my baby boy, we decided to go looking for him. But first I called the department asking that they apprehended him. That was around 7:30. They said no, so Craig and I, my younger son and I, we went out looking for him in the area he said he chased him in, out across from the probation office. We called his name, looking for him. I put my hands behind my back and walked the area, and I said, well, maybe he fell in the river. So after we looked for a while, I went back and called the Macon Police Department and asked them would this drag the river. I said, maybe he fell in the river. They told me, ma'am, he's an escapee. You know, we don't know where your son is. So anyhow, that went on for almost 6 days. We were looking for him, and I asked them to drag the river for almost 6 days with no help. And on the day they treated me like, well, you know, he's an escapee. We don't know where he is. But you chase a young man down to the river in handcuffs, handcuffed behind his back with hinge handcuffs. But you don't put on the news, Stephen Johnson, we chased him down to the river. All of a sudden he disappeared. No media coverage. You don't even come back to the house and ask, well, has he returned? You know, have anybody seen him? But better yet, it should have been major news coverage because he was in handcuffs down by the river. Gosh. That same week, the body came up. 6 days, we go back. 6 days, like I said, we looked for him. It was Monday, October the 16th. We had been out in the area looking, in the area that they say they chased him in, looking in the river. We happened to see 2 guys in a boat just riding back and forth, looking in that area, in the river. They weren't fishing. I left my area and went to the probation office around 4 and asked them, what could you all do a missing person report? Can you put it on, do media coverage? Of course, they denied it. I got home around 6. I got a call from the probation officer. His probation officer, Hurley, called and told me now I can do a missing person report. Within 30 minutes, I got a call and said that my son's body had been found at a river. So I went down to the river. Officer Matthews, David Matthews was there, Lonnie Miley was there, and I said, can I go identify my son? They said, ma'am, how do you notice your son? Go back, especially Lonnie Miley, he's black. They said, you can't go down there. I said, well, you all chased him down to the river. I said, Roger Stembridge. I said, he told my son 3 months early he had a bet on him that he would not make it off intense probation. I said, you tell him he won his bet.
That's the probation officer.
Roger Stembridge, who has a history of terror.
Okay.
Especially treating blacks, from what I've been told by a lot of blacks here in Macon, even sad to say, even whites, that he is just a major reign of terror. And I've told he's murdered other individuals. My son is not the first person that he's murdered. Sad to say, by a captain at the police department, he sat there and told me to my face, ma'am, I was his supervisor in the 90s, late 90s, and he killed another black man. But it made him resign. Okay, it's sad to say, like I say, here it goes again. Here's a black person telling me, okay, I know this man has done wrong. I know he's been treating blacks wrong, but this man is still able to walk around with a badge and a gun. He left the police department and went to the probation department. Still a major reign of terror. From what I told, there's been several blacks that he's murdered and placed weapons on him, pretending, I was just protecting myself. But my son wasn't protecting himself. He had handcuffs on. That day the body came up, one of the men that was in that boat that day, he was at the Waffle House and he was talking about what had happened to my son. And coincidentally, somebody that knew us heard it and got in contact with me, and I asked him, asked her, could he have him get in contact with me? So anyhow, he had me meet him at the Waffle House. I met him, and he was telling me about how bad it was the day my son was murdered. He said it was so bad, he didn't want to talk to me in depth about it, but he said he was there not only the day that my son was murdered, but he also was there the day that the body came up. He was there, he pulled the body up. The police wasn't telling the truth about how that body was found. He said, after they pulled the body up out the river, he said, ma'am, I told the officers, he said, somebody had beat the H out of him. But he said it was so bad that they started putting mud all over his face to cover up the bruises. There was a lot of things he told me that was so horrific that you wouldn't even think that somebody would do to an individual. From pistol whipping, beating, and then the worst part is you turn around and shoot somebody 3 or 4 times. Once point blank in the head.
The coroner's report indicated shots
No.
into the body?
No. Didn't.
So how did you reach that conclusion?
Yeah. Like I said, that day, they refused to let me identify him the day the body was found. That was on that Monday. That Tuesday, I was supposed to be able to go identify the body at the morgue, but Lonnie Miley called me. He told me I couldn't do that. He said they identify him by fingerprints.
Who is Lonnie Miley?
He's deputy coroner.
Okay.
And a member now of the city council. So they were supposed to release the body Tuesday at 11, but they didn't. They called and told me that the body wouldn't be released until Wednesday. I got a call from the funeral home and said that I need to bury him, not look at him. And I said, well, I'm not burying anybody if I don't see him. So the body, they received the body at the funeral home. Well, I saw the body around 11 at the funeral home, Bentley Funeral Home. And when I went in to look at him, it was horrific. There was knots sticking all up in his forehead. There was a hole above his right eye. His lower legs were twisted. His arms were out of place. Gosh. The smell was just terrible. What bothered me more was to sit there and look at him, mutilated like that. And they said he just fell in the river and drowned. That Tuesday when Lonnie Miley called me, he said, my son died from asphyxia. I called him back after I saw the body and said, asphyxia from what, choking or drowning? One other major thing that I asked him to do was to send my son's body to Atlanta. I said, because of the conflict of interest here. I said, the body needs to go to Atlanta. He said, ma'am, the same medical examiner in Atlanta is going to be the same medical examiner that examines your son here in Macon. I said, well, I don't care, send the body to Atlanta. He didn't send the body to Atlanta. And I'm thinking a body in water should have been re-examined, but they didn't. My eyes burning.
He's going to get you some tea.
Okay, thank you.
Just stay where you are in thought. You're doing excellent.
My son had a hole above his right knee, like a round bullet hole in his right leg. He had holes in his chest. None of that was documented. But the worst thing, they never gave me an autopsy report, a copy of the autopsy report. I called, and of course they'll say, well, it's not available, not available. Matter of fact, the city of Macon never gave me a copy. An attorney I had, wife accidentally sent me a copy. This was January of 2001. But when I got a copy of it and read it, thank you, there was nothing on there about the hole in his head. There was nothing on there about the holes in his body. So I called and questioned about that. God told him, I said, I heard my son was shot. And I told him I saw holes in his body. I saw his legs being twisted. I said, he had to have broken bones. I said, there's no way you could see the bones protruding up in the skin that's all out of shape in somebody's forehead, and the bones not, and they not be broken. And I had pictures taken at the funeral home. Matter of fact, within 3 weeks after the funeral, the mortician and G.B.R came by my house, and he told me, he said, ma'am, your son was murdered. He said, an officer, Keith Williams, told me more in detail. He said, but I can't tell you because we'll both lose our jobs. Coincidentally, that was one of the officers that was depositioned during the course of deposition I filed a civil suit 2 years later. That officer was suspended for like 27 days.
Keith Williams?
Keith Williams. He worked at the funeral home also. But he kept sending me messages. There was more to it, but he couldn't tell because he would lose his job. I did get messages from different people. And coincidentally, he's related to my grandson. And his grandfather spoke to me. He said, ma'am, he said, Keith said, Steve was murdered. But of course, you know, he can't just come out and talk to you. And it's so sad for officers or even people to know that someone was murdered unlawfully and they can't say anything. And it's sad, it's worse for you to sit there and look at this body mutilated and knowing that there was much more to it, there's much more wrong, but you're looking at paperwork from a medical examiner and a deputy coroner, Lonnie Miley, the medical examiner was Dr. Melissa Sims, stating that it was accidental drowning. Nothing documenting the hole in his head, the hole in his legs, the twisted legs. But as medical examiners, I had other medical examiners to review her report. First, I had the body dug up, disinterment on April the 20th of 2001. The medical examiner called me immediately when he finished the autopsy and told me, ma'am, your son got markings on his forehead, but the handcuffs were more important than the markings on his body because the handcuffs were his handcuffs. They were stating that he put the handcuffs from the back in the front. When they found my son's body, the handcuffs were in the front with a garment tied around him in a knot. Originally. But the first medical examiner only took 10 pictures. She didn't even disclose the body. She took pictures of the body fully closed. She didn't take any close-up pictures. She only took like 3 or 4 pictures of the body. No close pictures of the face, which was bloody.
Macon County?
Bibb County. She works for the G.B.R, right? She works for the G.B.R, Georgia Bureau of Investigations. Dr. Melissa Sims.
Has there been any public inquiries into this at all?
No, the only thing they did was an inquest, and it was just as corrupted. They never showed the pictures at the inquest. You know, you would think they would have put them up on a projector and let the family and all see them. I had never seen the pictures. They were telling me there weren't any pictures. It took me being persistent and resilient to get those pictures. And when I got the pictures, I was like, I didn't know it was that bad. Because what I saw at the funeral home had been worked on.
Do you have any of those original pictures now?
I have them. I don't have them, but I have them, yes. All basically the original pictures, I have them. From the mud being put on the face, nobody could explain during the deposition how the mud got on or off of his face. Even the deputy coroner, Lonnie Miley, said in his deposition that there was no mud on the face. But then there are pictures with mud on his face. And the medical examiner said, well, you know, she didn't see the mud. It was like, well, you're a medical examiner. It seemed like you should have did research before you even did the autopsy report. There should have been, she should have went out to the scene. There should have been questions. She should have gotten a report. She said she hadn't spoken to anybody. It seemed like she would have said, well, what happened to this young man? You know, what led up to his death? No, this is supposedly an accidental drowning, you know, while in custody, worse. So he should have been examined from head to toe. There should have been photographs of everything. She didn't do blood work. She said she ruled out fractures with vision and book study. There's no way she could have ruled out fractures without taking x-rays. And there's no way she could have ruled out trauma without doing tissue study. She didn't do any blood work. But on her report stated that hold the blood. I read that. And worse yet, he was locked up that day supposedly for being positive for marijuana. Toxicology reports say no drugs. All negative for all basic drugs. And I feel as though my son was negative that day. I think Roger Stemridge has a history of lying, especially to keep blacks locked up. He has a history of locking blacks up. And
how are you pronouncing his name? Roger?
Stemridge.
R-O-G-E-R-S?
R-O-G-E-R.
Okay.
Stemridge, S-T-E-M-B-R-I-D-G-E.
Okay.
Roger Stemridge.
He's a white male?
Right, white male.
Former police officer, now probation officer.
Yes, well, now, I think 2007, I think October 2007, he went to now he's working in the courthouse as a bailiff or bailiff.
Okay.
But from 2000 to 2007, he still was able to carry a gun, and I think he still carries a gun from what I was told, with a history of abuse, with a history of murdering blacks.
Have you been able to get anybody in this county, city, or area to work with you?
No.
To try and get to the truth?
No. I spoke with the NAACP, Mr. Ed DuBose. He came down. I mean, he even stood up at a meeting with a few city council members and stated that Lonnie Miley told him that the medical examiner botched my son's case. He also stated that he knew for a fact that my son was murdered because when he went to Coretta Scott King's funeral, somebody from Macon told him that, you know, my son was murdered. It's like he was telling them that, well, you know, I got information. I know that this young man was murdered. But what did he do? Nothing. And this sad enough, worse.
Was he from local NAACP?
No, he was state president.
State president.
Right, state president of the NAACP.
Go ahead and make the next point.
And he told me, he said, ma'am, I got to figure out a way to keep Lonnie Miley from going to jail. And I'm looking at the man like, I'm this person that's deceased, that was wrongfully murdered by these officers. Sad that blacks were involved also because they knew what happened. They aided and abetted this man. You're going to tell me to my face that you got to figure out how to keep Lonnie Miley from going to jail.
Spell that name you were saying. Right?
Lonnie, L-O-N-N-I-E, Miley, M-I-L-E-Y.
And he was
He was a member of the city council. He is a member of the city council. And he was a member of the NAACP.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Of course, that wasn't any...
Why would he have to be threatened with jail? I don't understand that.
He said he found out that Lonnie Miley was involved into it more than he thought. Lonnie Miley was the one who told me I couldn't identify my son's body. Lonnie Miley was the one who allowed the probation officers to come in the lab, the morgue, and view that body. It should have cut off once that body got to G.B.R. lab. That where his jurisdiction started. But he went into the lab that same night the body was found and took that body out and allowed those probation officers to go to the morgue and view that body. What they did, I don't know. But I heard they did some work to my son's body, and they had to, because when I saw it, it was bad. But like I said, they had to do a lot of work to it to improve the features. I mean, the face was really mutilated when I saw the pictures. And I'm like, well, gosh, what I saw at the funeral home, baby. But like I said, this was worse. Because when I saw the pictures, the mouth was open and you didn't see any teeth. You saw a pink gum. You had to blow the pictures up. You could see a pink gum in the top with no teeth. Of course, like I said, I had a lot of questions, and that's why I had the body disinterred. I had the body exhumed again. And that doctor, I could tell he was fearful. Dr. Fritz told me, ma'am, he said, you don't even know what I'm going through. He told me he couldn't even tell the truth. He says, it's impossible for me to even give you the x-rays or the pictures. I had to hire investigators to go after that doctor in Atlanta to get the pictures, x-rays. And he finally sent me an autopsy report. And he said, but I'm going to do what I can to help you. So he documented things that he saw, but he put no signs of trauma, no trauma. But he documented like dark brown spots on the body, numerous amount of disfigurement. Abrasions. This is worse yet. He had like abrasions across his back, like where he'd been beaten with billy clubs. The abrasions were all across his back. But he did document that now. But he didn't rule out no signs of trauma. He just put abrasions at 45-degree angles across the back, well, in the back.
And this was a private doctor that
Correct.
you had employed?
One that I hired. Sad enough, though, he worked for the state. I didn't realize that, you know, you're going through something like this, I never experienced it, don't ever want to go through this, and hope nobody would ever have to go through this. But I refuse to let my son's death be in vain, knowing that he was murdered. So anyhow, yeah, there was somebody that I hired, and I'm pretty sure he was tampered with some form of fashion by someone. But like I said,
no justice at all came out of the little bit of truth that he revealed?
No, they ignored it. It's like they ignored it. I even had the body dug up and sent to Atlanta, and a lot of strange things happened. When I finally got the pictures back from that one, but I'll tell you this, let me go to this. When the doctor got the body, he called me, he said, ma'am, he said, Stemmerich and all his boys have got to go to jail. He said, ma'am, this is terrible. He said, it is so bad. He called the attorneys and told them, he said, well, you know, really, he don't even have to have a scratch on his body. Roger Stemmerich violated him when he tested him and said he was positive for marijuana. He said he doesn't have a license. He's not certified to even say that this man was positive for marijuana. He's like, well, I want the test results. The attorney that I had wasn't sending him anything. He wasn't working with. He was asking for, you know, give me the weather report. There were documents that he needed, investigative report, you know, what kind of investigation was done. He requested it several times and never got it. And for what I've seen, that doctor's license was suspended. Why? I really don't know, but come out, he couldn't even testify. The x-rays and pictures were sent to the attorney. He finally showed them to me. And when he did, I had questions. On the x-rays, you could see teeth were missing. You could see lines across both the bottom part of his legs. I said, his legs are broken. He even agreed with me. This attorney was showing them to me. They were on a CD, on the computer. And he cut that computer off. He said, you don't need to see these. I told him I wanted to see the pictures. He showed me the pictures. And I said, well, you can see the bones are broken. I said, his legs are broken. He took them all, and he left. And I had to keep calling him and tell him I want copies of them. He finally sent me copies a few months later. Not of all the pictures that I saw. Not of all the x-rays that I saw. The ones that I pointed out the teeth were missing, I didn't get a copy of it. The one where I pointed out where the legs were broken, I didn't get a copy of them. To this day, I still don't have a copy of them. I wasn't satisfied. I had another mortality review by 2 doctors. They looked at the x-rays and the pictures. And I have the reports with the affidavit. stated that one of them stated my son's death was a homicide. And he said it was just absurd. You could just look at the pictures and tell that there was trauma. It's like, it didn't take a rocket science to just look at these bloody, mutilated pictures and say that this man was beaten, severely beaten. And he said that you don't know what else happened. The first thing, the first medical examiner, which her report was flawed, extremely flawed, because she didn't do a complete exam. And you're looking at a bloody, mutilated face, and you don't take complete pictures of this face, you know, up close or from the side, just some pictures from the front.
And who was this lady?
Dr. Melissa Sims.
Melissa
Sims.
Sims.
Right, S-I-M-S.
S?
S-I-M-S.
Okay, located where?
She's located in Macon, right out of Macon, where the G.B.R. lab is.
Okay.
On Riggins Mill Road, I think.
Okay, thank you.
And one thing I did do during the course of this, I had the ex-medical examiner from Macon to review the photographs and x-rays with me. And it's like he knew what happened. He said he was just shocked that she didn't do a complete and thorough exam on my son and document what she saw. He told me, he said, ma'am, he said, they threatened me. And I'm looking at him, he said, ma'am, he said, I have to deny anything that I say to you. And he said, they threatened me. This was Dr. John Parker. After he reviewed everything with me in 2005, he called the NAACP. He spoke to Mr. Bob Parker in Atlanta. He spoke to Mr. White in Thomaston, Georgia. He told them my son was dead before he hit the water. But did I hear anything from them? Mr. White, I had to question him, and he said, well, he called me, and he said your son was dead. Miss McGhee, your son was dead before he hit the water. So they knew that. Another young lady that worked at the sheriff department.
Well, before you go to the sheriff department, was there any water in the lungs?
No, no water was in
them.
There was no water in the lungs. I read that report myself, and it said the upper airway was clear. So if he was breathing, the upper airway should have had debris in it. He was dead before he hit the water. There was no water in his lungs, even from the weight of the lungs. They were normal. Even I think one of them was even below normal weight. So, you know, due to the normal weight of the lungs, if there were water in the lungs should have been heavier, but they weren't. And that was one of the major questions I had about, you know, the lungs, no water in the lungs, and the bilateral petrous hemorrhaging. The first medical examiner, Dr. Sims, did document bilateral petrous hemorrhaging of the temporal skull bones. He was bleeding out both sides of his head. That could have been from an inner-exit wound. The inner-exit, bilateral petrous hemorrhaging. But there was no, like I said, there was no thorough review or nothing to back up. It was just vague. She documented this, but then there was nothing to say, well, ruled out. It should have been, drowning is a rule of exclusion. You can only diagnose drowning by ruling out any other cause of death. There was nothing, she didn't rule out anything. She just said, well, this is what I say, you know, accidental drowning. But how? Like I said, no x-rays, no blood work, no tissue study, no pictures to even clarify things that she did document. And worse, like I said, not even a police report saying, well, what happened to this young man one day? You know, that day I saw the report that they gave Duncan Matthews, you know, probationer found by the river. Well, what happened? What led up to that point? There's nothing saying this young man went to report on probation, went to report that they said he was positive for marijuana, but I don't find any marijuana, no drugs in the system. Okay? All right, handcuffs were in the back, but now they're in the front with the garment tied around them in a knot. There are questions. There should have been not accidental. She should have put, well, I wouldn't have put that it was an accidental drowning. One doctor, the doctor from California, that oh gosh, I hate to even think about it. The ones that the attorney finally gave me some pictures, and I told you some of the pictures were missing. That was Dr. Posey. He put death undetermined, and that's what she should have put, death undetermined. But he said it should have been a homicide because of the circumstances surrounding the death. But she didn't leave out that choice, you know, undetermined.
Let's go to this period of time from the time that this young boy was handcuffed until the time that he came up missing. Tell me about that period of time. What does the police reports indicate for that period?
From the time that he supposedly been missing to the time they found the body?
No, from the time that he was handcuffed and arrested, and chased or whatever they did to him, and the time that somebody decided that he was missing. What kind of reports do we have in the police department
They said he
accounting for that period of time?
I really didn't have an actual police report. I never got any police reports. The police gave me a half-a-page report, and it only talked about the probation officers saying that there was an escapee. That's it. I never got a police report. As many police that I was told that was on the scene the day when the incident happened.
How many were you told that was on the scene?
I was told it was around 20. The young men that took him there, they said, ma'am, it was about 20 officers in that area.
Involved in a chase situation?
Right. Involved in a chase, from probation officers to police officers, Macon police.
A mobile chase or foot chase?
Foot chase, but I was told there were motorcycles, bicycles, I think they say motorcycles, but I know they say bicycles went up in the area, and cars drove up in the area. The area is right downtown across from the Macon Telegraph on Riverside. A small area, it's slightly wooded. At that time it was cold, so you could see through the woods, see through the leaves, and it's right by the river. So he couldn't go anywhere. The area was surrounded. They had a perimeter, a circle perimeter around him. It was like there were officers coming from the front, the back, well, both ways. He was just surrounded by cops. And it was like, ma'am, we were waiting for him to bring him out, but they never brought him out. They came out later, but they told them to leave the area. Civilians, you all leave the area. But I had one person that knew me. He was down there. He said, Renee, the area was blocked off. He said, I followed him to a certain point. He said, I heard what sounded like a vehicle backfiring. He said, I walked over to the area. He said, I saw Officer Fletcher and Whitaker get out of a vehicle, and I saw Duncan Matthews, Kenny Smith, I think it was. I saw those officers, and Jakowski, that's maybe another name that he called. He said, but they went into the area. He said, but they never brought him out of there. But he said it was quite a few officers down there. He said he could even hear over the intercom, the loudspeaker, the officer saying that if you weren't from Precinct 1 and weren't immediately involved in the incident, to leave the area. And he said he also heard on one of the probationers' radio saying that he had been apprehended. And I said, you sure? He said, Renee, I know what I heard. He said, I know about what time it happened. He said, I saw your son when he ran. I saw who ran after him, Roger Stimrich and Antonio Mitchell, Black Officer Antonio Mitchell. He said Antonio Mitchell took off first, and he said Stimrich pulled out his gun. And he said, I think he would have shot him. But he said people started running out. And he said he put the gun back in, but he said he was just so mad. And he took off. And he said there were numerous probation officers and Macon police officers. It's like, what did he do? He didn't kill nobody, he didn't rob nobody. He just they just said he was positive for marijuana. He said they could have just let him run. But like he said, when they get mad, they're just so furious. And he knew the probation officer, Roger Stimrich. He's like, Renee, this man will beat you down.
Were any black police officers identified as being on that scene? That you
Yeah, they told me that day, well, a few months later, they didn't tell me that day. They said there were black officers out there. I got names a few months later. Wendell Kyer name was called. Darren Marcus' name was called. And later I heard another name, Brian Tweedy. I can't think of any other officer's name. Black officer's name. Antonio, Antonio Mitchell. Antonio Mitchell is black.
Question that anybody watching this video tape is going to be born anyway. Tell me your rationale to the best you possibly can, your opinion as his mother. If your son knew Stembridge to be as violent and as vicious and as troublesome as you tell me that he knew him to be, why would he provoke him by trying to run from him? Wouldn't he know that that was going to bring down some serious trouble on him?
I think that day my son was just so happy. He thought that was 6 months to that day. He just knew he'd been doing so good, not getting in trouble. He said, Mama, he said, he was looking to come off for intense that day. That was his joy. He said that earlier, he said, Mama, he said, I'm going to be free at last, So, we were happy.
So he left you in that spirit
right.
and went to see Stembridge.
Right, earlier, a few days earlier, he said, I'll be free at last. And Steve was a kind of a quiet person. He wasn't mean, and if he got mad about things, sometimes he just didn't say anything. I done lost track.
Well, we were talking about why he would run from Stembridge, knowing that Stembridge had a reputation of being a bad person.
Yeah, he provoked, I think, just to know that he had to go to jail. And more yet for something, him accusing him of being positive for marijuana. And my son knew he wasn't positive. I think that was even more hurting to him. To say, how can I beat this? This man can accuse me of something that I know I'm not guilty of and get away with it. It's like, where's my justice? And I think he just chose, his choice that day was to run. And I guess he figured out, if I get away from him, I'm not coming back.
Is there justice in Macon for black people?
No, it's not justice in Macon for blacks. And it depends on who you are. I guess if you work with the system, you may find justice, but you got to work with them. And so many blacks, and sad to say, they use them for informants. And those same informants, they go get other blacks in trouble. Sad to say. Control. By the police, is sad to say, but controlled by authority. And they think there's no other way out. But it is.
What will it take? Speak to me as a black woman. Speak to me as a mother. Speak to me as a very intelligent human being. What will it take to bring some justice to Macon County, Georgia?
It would take, first, corruption. You have to get the corrupt figures out of there. You're not going to get any better when your political figures, when there's so much corruption there. You see even people that want to do right, and you're thinking, well, things could be done better, but then you don't see anything getting any better. You hear about crimes every day, blacks being murdered every day, young black men, now women being murdered, and it doesn't stop there. The corruption is from the top. It's not going to get any better as long as you got corrupt figures there in office. And it's sad when you can hear NAACP members saying, well, this mayor, Ricker, says that, well, he didn't know what he was doing, but he got the position, took the position as a mayor. And I'm listening at this lady, and I'm like, are you sure? I'm like, yes, ma'am. He was at a meeting, and he said he don't even know what he's even doing. But he's the mayor of Macon. And it was sad just to listen at her tell me that. It's like, well, if he doesn't know what he's doing, then you got a chief of police that's racist, I feel. And you got, sorry to say, black cops that are fed into this system, you know, well, the only way I can keep my job, the only way I can keep doing, you know, keep my job and keep my family going, I got to follow the rules. But the rules are not always right, you know. A lot of times, like I say, blacks are overcharged here in Macon, and a lot of times, most blacks here don't feel that they can get ahead unless they follow their rules. And the city council, that's a joke. There are a lot of things that they can do differently also. They know that there's corruption there. And they know that blacks have been mistreated for years. And a lot of them that are there, as long as everything's going fine at their house, it's okay. But what about the other black? What about your other black, you know, sisters and brothers, you know, and their families? You know, it's okay. You're doing okay. But you're there to make it better for everybody, including whites and blacks. You're there to make it better for everybody, but it's not that way. And I think it takes changing. You got to get a better, start from the top, better figures there. Or somebody who wants to make everything, you know, you can't do everything right, but you can make it better. You can go into black neighborhoods, all these dilapidated homes, even putting out better education for people, even young blacks that can't afford to go to college, maybe some type of system where they can earn money and get some type of degree in some type of field that, you know, they like working in, you know. Maybe they could do something like that, you know, to help a lot of these young blacks that are on the street that may be selling drugs and then think that that's the only way out. But it's not the only way out. You know, they end up fighting each other because I guess they don't see anything different. And they know the cops don't worry about it. Like, they don't care. We shoot you up. You know, we can just, God, sad.
Now, finally,
sad.
For me, you have done very, very good. Speak to this community, because I don't think government is no better than the community.
That's right. It's corrupt.
Don't demand justice. They're not going to get justice. But speak to this community of Macon, Georgia. What do you say to them?
It's a community of Macon, Georgia, and especially blacks, to improve and make things better for yourself. You have to stay in together and ask for and demand that things are made better for you. Because there are sources out there, things that can be made better, even your neighborhoods. You can demand that your neighborhoods are improved. This regentrification in the neighborhoods, just not allowing, accepting whatever bad deeds are given to you. You don't have to accept that when you know that you've been treated wrong. But we all have to work together and stand by each other to make it better. Because like they said, it takes more than just one. It may take one to start, but then once you all get together and work and say, well, we can do better, I know we can, you know, this place can be improved. You go into the white neighborhoods and you see how nice it is, but your neighborhood could be just as nice if you all work together. And even if you see somebody doing wrong and you know they're doing wrong, they may not want to hear it, but, you know, entice them to do better. You know, I mean, tell them, well, you know, you don't want to murder each other, you want to help each other.
Could any mother, black, in the city of Macon, Georgia, end up in the same predicament that you ended up in as a mother, losing your son to unjust violence?
How many more it has been? There's been many more. My son is not the only one been murdered by authorities here in Macon and covered up. There have been several Emmett Tills. Oh gosh. And that they've covered up. No, murdered by authorities. And sad to say, even after my son. Like Mr. Tatum's son, you know. And it's sad when a captain tells you, ma'am, this officer, true enough, the guy may have stolen a little something, a $50 radio, but then you don't run over him with your police car. This guy was white, Dwayne Watson. You know, he's telling me, well, this man, Officer Dwayne Watson, ran over the guy, hit the guy with his car, then got out and jumped on him. They took him to jail. And the father tells me, you know, he's not knowing where his son is, wondering what happened to his son. 6 days later, they call him and tell him to come and see him. He goes to see him. He's dead at the hospital.
In custody?
Well, he was in the hospital then. They took him to the hospital. He was in the hospital for 6 days. But they took him to jail first after the guy, Dwayne Watson, had hit him with the car and beat him.
He died in custody?
He died in custody. That's what he said. Renee, I believe he was already dead. They just held him on the support until they had to figure out what to do.
And whose son was this?
His father's name is Tony Tatum. The last name Tatamon. I want to say his first name is Keith Tateman. And I think it was a story. Matter of fact, they had in the paper death deemed a homicide. But I don't know exactly what happened to Dwayne Watson. But his name was called as being one of the officers on the scene when my son was murdered. Roger Stembridge called his name. That's the only officer name he called to say it was on the scene.
I want to go ahead.
Yeah. But like I say, there are numerous other people that have been either murdered or injured severely while in custody of Macon police. And the sad thing about it, when you have someone in handcuffs, I don't care if they ran, as long as they haven't injured the officer, once they get him in handcuffs, they should take him to jail. It's like my son, once they apprehended my son, he should have been taken to jail, not beat him severely. You know, I've had people come to me and tell me about officers like Officer Self or Officer McGhee, Officer Williams, you know, how Officer Hosey, how bad they have been treated from the homeless people, how bad they have been beaten and brutalized and threatened, even made jump in the river, especially by Officer McGhee and Williams and Hosey. Black and white.
Into the river trying to get away from the police?
They made them jump in the river. The homeless guys told me that they made them jump in the river. After that happened to my son, I started going out myself talking to these homeless people. I heard a lot of horrific stories. It was telling me that Officer Hosey told him that he didn't like homeless people. And like I said again, those three officers, Hosey, McGhee, Brent McGhee, who I was told raped somebody, and I guess I don't know if they fired him or let him go, but he's not there anymore, I was told.
Are you saying Hosey?
Hosey, H-O-L-S-E-Y. I think it's Roy Hosey.
And what's the other officer, two officers' name?
Brent McGhee. Brent McGhee.
Brent?
B-R-E-N-T. McGhee, M-A-G-O-U-I-R-K. Roy Williams.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. But one homeless man told me that McGhee and Williams was the one that beat him severely because of what happened to my son. Matter of fact, one NAACP member, Mr. White, was with me when he told me what happened to him. And how I knew about him, somebody that worked at Burger King came to me and said, ma'am, this man knows what happened to your son. So I went out looking for him myself. In the process of looking for him, I met several other homeless people. When they found out who I was, they feared. It's like, man, we can't even be seen talking to you. It was just that bad, that people were threatened. And I was told some murdered. Some homeless people were murdered because of what happened to my son.
Let me stop this because my tape is running out.
Okay.
And I want to take the opportunity to thank you so very much for mustering the tenacity to stand here today or sit here today and share your story with me. And I'm going to help you get your story around the world. Do I have your permission to do
Oh, yes, you do. Yeah, you have my permission. And did you, I tried to email you 2 of the pictures. Were you able to see them?
No, they wasn't clear. That's why we need to get photographs of your photographs.
Okay.
We'll have him do that and email them to me, or you can do it.
Okay, good. Yeah. Yeah,
I
because
tried my best to blow them up and to make them into what I could understand, because I knew I was going to see Emmett Till II.
you don't believe me.
But I just couldn't get it through.
All right, right. Because if they had a computer here, I could pull it up and let you see it.
Okay.
But yeah. And I tried to send. Yeah, believe me, it was Emmett Till again. To me, it was just as worse because the face I saw. Ooh, Emmett's picture. But then when I look at my son's face, and I mean, you couldn't even tell it was him. I mean, it's like they just mutilated the face, was just mutilated. And then they had the audacity to say that there was no signs of trauma when you're looking at a bloody, mutilated face. But there was no, the river didn't cause that.
Precious Lord, take Mrs. McGhee's hand, lead her on, help her stand. She has been weak, she has been strong. We know you are strong through the wind, through the rain. Lead her on, help her stand. Take her hand, precious Lord, and lead her on.
Because of the question I was asking even before she even did the autopsy, I was calling in. But, I mean, here's a person in custody. You want to rule out, for them to rule out that they were not included, a complete autopsy should have been done. And for my clarity.
When you had your autopsy done privately, was that complete?
No. Well, it was a little more shared. The first autopsy I had done in Atlanta, the medical examiner called me and told me the next day, he said, ma'am, the same day, he said, Miss McGhee, he said, number one, it should have taken her 4 hours to do a complete autopsy on your son. She only did, it was like an hour and maybe 15 minutes. And I don't even think it was an hour and a half that she completed the autopsy. And then he said it wasn't thorough. And he was like, I need more photographs, I need more x-rays, but they was not presented to me. At first they told me there weren't even many pictures. But anyhow, he said the markings on my son, he said the handcuffs were more important than the markings on my son, which he didn't go into clarity about. But after me calling him several times and having to hire investigators, I finally got the autopsy report. He did the autopsy in April. I was able to receive the autopsy report in September.
You mean from your private person?
I had to hire investigators. Right, from the private person I hired. He told me.
Well, why would you have to go through those changes with your own private person?
The medical examiner told me that when he said, ma'am, he said, you don't know what I'm going through. That was the first remark he made to me. And then after calling, he said, ma'am, he said, it's impossible for me to give you the report. So he wouldn't give it to me. So like I said, that's when I hired investigators to go after him. And I finally got the report, which he did send that to me after they contacted him. And there were issues of, he said, no fractures on palpation. But he didn't talk about the fractures of the x-ray. He did give me one x-ray. And you could clearly see fractures to the skull. He didn't even talk about the x-ray. He did say markings at straight line abrasions in his back at 45-degree angle. There were markings across his back where he could have possibly been beaten with a billy club. There were straight line abrasions at angles across his back, across his neck, and I think his arm.
Did you ever find out what he meant by you don't know what he's going through? You think he was being intimidated?
Yes, oh yes, definitely. As a matter of fact, there was something they told the young man that took the body there. They was like they were trying to scare him when he took the body there. It's like certain people we know that can do things to you. And the man, he never went into detail about it, but he never really just talked to me about it, and that's all that was said. That he just happened to be playing pool one day, and a person that knew somebody made a comment to him, but it was like, you know, be careful.
Okay.
So I think a lot of people just were scared, and from the last attorney I hired.
Where was he located, this medical examiner?
He was in Atlanta. Matter of fact, he was a state medical examiner, and I just, at that time I wasn't thinking, I was just trying to get a good medical examiner. He was referred to me by someone that was downtown, excuse me. But the bad thing about it, he worked for the state, and at that time, you know, I just didn't know. I should have just got somebody else besides a state medical examiner. But you would think they would tell him that the truth would have been told. And he wanted to tell the truth. And basically he was telling me, he said, ma'am, I want to help you. He said, I'm going to do what I can. And I think he did. He put so much on his report. You know, there were certain things, like I said, on the report that was not on the first report, like the circular compressions around the wrist, around the ankles, just like the ones around the wrist.
Okay. Did he mention the missing teeth? Or the holes in the body?
No,
that could have been gunshot?
No, he didn't even mention it. No, he just talked about the dark brown spots. He gave it color, you know, but he didn't give it, he didn't say exhume the body a second time, which I went through a hard time getting the body up, but I did. I said the body sent to California. And when the medical examiner first saw the body, he said, ma'am, he said, Stimrich and all his boys have got to go to jail. Okay, that was like on a Monday or Tuesday, September 23rd. Of 2000, I think it was 2003 or 4. I'm not clear on that date right at this time. But I was called the next day to be depositioned, immediately to be depositioned by the defense. And I thought that was strange. My attorney was like, Ms. McGhee, they want you their money to be depositioned. So before the medical examiner could even give him his report, they were asking me questions about the second autopsy, which I thought it was strange. The attorneys gave them information. He didn't want his information. He didn't want anybody to know his name or number before he released the autopsy report. And they gave the defense the information on this person. And the CEO told me that they had started calling his office. And now this was after he told me that Stimrich and all, he said, my son, he said, ma'am, this case is so severe. He even called in an attorney himself, out of California. He said, ma'am, we need a good attorney. He was trying to get Johnny Cochran firm to come in with another attorney that he referred me to, that I spoke with their office. And it's like they knew what had happened, but after they started getting calls, he said, no trauma found. But the photographs of the broken bones, you can clearly see. The bones that just fell apart, I mean, you can clearly see. If the bones were intact, there shouldn't have been any broken areas on the bone. Matter of fact, the feet were missing. But the bones are just like I said, I mean, they were in small pieces, some of them. And you can see like a burnt mark on the kneecap, where the kneecap was just cut. You can, I mean, it's clearly seen on the photograph. Even the x-rays, you clearly see broken bones, especially the face. There's major fractures to the face. You can see, I mean, even just a normal person knowing what a skull bone looked like, could clearly see that the bones were even tampered with. I didn't show him the first skull photograph for a reason, because I didn't trust anybody. And he sent me a photograph of the skull where he recut it. You can tell the bone had been tampered with. He cut the skull trying to make it fit together, where you wouldn't see where it was broken, or had it, I guess, been where it was broken. He cut it. I had 2 more medical examiners to look over the photographs. Doctor went out of California, went out of Tennessee, and they clearly stated that it was a homicide. Well, one stated it was a homicide. One stated that the investigation wasn't even complete. They said the medical examiner report was woefully inadequate.
Okay. And nobody in the criminal justice system have been willing to listen to or examine the evidence that you were able to gain from these other sources?
No, all I know was the man Young, the person that was out here that day, and was there when the body was pulled up. and was there in that boat that day surfing in the river for the body. Met with FBI agent, and he told me after meeting with him, he threatened him, and he said the FBI agent and one of the officers that was out there when your son was murdered threatened me. He said, ma'am, don't ever talk to the FBI again. And another young lady who spoke with the NAACP and the agent supposedly told me, ma'am, she said, I don't think I need to get into this. You know, after she told me and several other people what she heard at the sheriff department. She was working at the sheriff department when the calls came through. She said, ma'am, they murdered your son. She said, I know for a fact because I was listening on the radio at the sheriff department. She said herself and another man, she called his name at that time. I don't remember his name. She said, but I know he's not going to want to get into it. But she said, after they murdered your son, they were laughing when he threw the body in the river and said, what he's going to say now, he's catfish bait. And that corresponds with what the officer told me. That that's what he heard on the radio, it was catfish bait.
And how are you today?
Ooh, I feel really good today, Chief. We've had an incredible opportunity to walk in the Macon community, but not just walk in the community, but apply serious attention and attention to the issues that Miss McGhee and it has been dealing with over the last 10 years between 2000 and now 2010 with the death of her son, or the murder of her son, I should say, by what appears to be the police here in Macon, and not any resolve at all for her in terms of honoring his life. And so today we walked with the intention of memorializing his life, her efforts, and all the mothers around the country who are having the same agony. You know, what's happening to their young sons and daughters as they go out into the world in their communities and don't come back home, either through murder or imprisonment. And so that's what today was like. And it felt really good to walk to the spots where that played a pivotal role in his last days here in Macon.
And when they pulled the body up, something they didn't talk about in the first autopsy was the circular compression marks around both of his ankles, just like the ones around his wrist. Meaning that he's possibly was handcuffed around the ankles also. So how could he run? Ooh. From what I was told, they caught him on the railroad. That's what I was told, and that's what I was last told by people that I knew, that he was last seen on the railroad track alive with officers coming at him in all diameters in a perimeter, from the front, the back, in this area. And there were officers that had already rode up by vehicle through the alley-like area. So there was nowhere for him to go. And I was told that they caught him on the railroad track, they beat him severely. And after they got so mad because he was severely beaten, that they shot him, the probation officer, Stemridge, shot him several times. And then they said, what we're going to do next? And they threw the body in the river. And that's when they say it was catfish bait. And that same thing. Basically say it all added up to he was murdered by the authorities.
And all of your theories come from information that have been gathered from a variety of sources, right?
Right, correct. A variety of sources, from individuals that eyewitnessed it and from individuals that work at the police department that either there or knew what happened from other officers telling them what happened and what they heard on the radio, that he was caught by Officer Chris Bartley and another officer and turned over to Roger Stemridge and Antonio Mitchell. So he was in their custody.
Right, and just simply disappeared.
So they say he just disappeared.
And what time was this based on your best information?
Well, Stemridge came to my house around about 6:25 that afternoon.
Well, that was way after the situation,
Correct,
wasn't it?
way after the situation.
What time did the incident allegedly happen?
Around 2 o'clock.
Okay.
2 o'clock that afternoon. And I was told they were here for a good while. I don't know how long, but I was told that they were here for a while. But they blocked the area off, so one could come in or out. Okay. Nothing but the officers that were in the immediate area when the incident happened. Even some of the other officers weren't allowed to come in. And of course, like I said, the civilians and the persons that brought him to the probation office that day, they weren't able to to come in.
Well, if this thing happened at 2-something, why did Stembridge come to your house at 6-something?
Well, from what I think, it was a cover-up, just to make me think that it happened later that afternoon, to contradict what, like the bus driver said. You know, this happened earlier because he was en route to his route going over the MLK Bridge. The city bus driver told me that when he left from downtown en route to start his route, which was in the East Macon area, he was headed over the MLK Bridge. And that was when he happened to look to the left, he said, because he had a habit of always looking at the water level. And he said at that time it was low. And he said he happened to look to the left and he saw a large splash in the river. And that is, he said, when he called in and stated that because he had seen officers going to the area, maybe, and had heard about the probationary escaping, they were in chasing at that time, that maybe he maybe fell in the river. And he told him to look in that area. Maybe somebody was drowning, or maybe it may have been the probationer. And he said they told him to hold on for a minute, and they came back to the line and stated that he'd already been captured. Don't worry about it, and forget what he had seen.
Actually told him to forget what he had seen?
Right, that's right. Mm-hmm. Correct. Don't worry about it. Just forget it.
Did you ever consider having a psyche take a look at this situation?
Yes, I did. My inspiration of looking at court TV, trying to find out the causes of death, dealing with my son, because I didn't believe it was a drowning. I just happened to look at a show that showed a psychic that just happened to look at photographs and visit the area. And she made a conclusion of who did the murder. But anyhow, I got in contact with the psychic, and she asked me to send her a photograph before and after of my son. And in her visions, after viewing the photographs and I guess a little information about my son, her conclusion was that he was murdered, and there were like 12 officers involved. She mentioned 2 white officers. One was real tall, lanky, and wiry, salt and pepper hair. And she mentioned a shorter officer. She mentioned something about a flashlight, that he had been beaten severely, about a flashlight, and she also mentioned that he was shot several times. Excuse me.
Now, did this jive with, is that all of that?
It's okay. More, but I just can't remember all.
Does this jive with the information that you had picked up from homeless people and other people who was actually witnessing the situation?
It does. And the tall person, lanky person with the salt and pepper hair, came to my mind was Stembridge, the actual probation officer, and I was told that did the shooting. And from the information I was told that Roger Stembridge actually did the shooting. He was the one that pulled the gun out. He was the one who shot him. As a matter of fact, a person that was at the probation office that day said when he was standing there when they brought my son out, and when he supposedly first took off running, Stembridge pulled his gun out at that time to shoot him. He said, but people started running out in the area, so he didn't have a clear shot. And that's when the black officer was in the car in pursuit of him, and Stembridge immediately came to this area. And that's when he said nextly he heard the radios going off at the probation office, stating that he had already been apprehended.
Now, tell me about the black officer who came to your house at about 6 o'clock or so with Stembridge.
Yes.
Now, tell me about what he said and what he did.
He didn't say anything at first. Stembridge came up to the door by himself. When I heard someone knocking, and he knocked. As a matter of fact, he knocked at the other door. I had a duplex at that time. And the young man came to the door, and he told him he was looking for Stephen Wathow. And I happened to hear that, and I said, I know it's Stephen, but it's not Stephen Wathow. And he said, Stephen Johnson. He said he was Stembridge, the probation officer, and he had failed his drug test because his urine was so clear. And that gave him probable cause to arrest him. And he said he'd handcuffed him behind his back. And he escaped. And he just came to see if he came home. And that's when I told him he didn't come home. I said, he's not here. And I said, he don't usually come in until around 7 or close to 7. And I knew it was about 6:25. I said, maybe in about 30 minutes or less than 30 minutes, he'll be here. And At that time, the black officer never said anything at that time. Matter of fact, he came up just a few minutes later after Stemridge. And Stemridge got ready to leave. And then he turned around, and the black officer came up the stairs with him. And he said, may I search your house? And I said, I know he's not here, but you can search your house. I don't have a problem with that. And that's when Stemridge walked through the house, through my foyer, just walked through and shined a flashlight. Then looking into the bedrooms, I told him, I said, here's Stephen's room. He didn't look in that room, didn't look in my bedroom, didn't look in the other side, didn't look anywhere, but in the bathroom, he just went and shined the light and said, Stephen, if you're in there, come out. Just in the bathroom, and then you got a whole house. Anyhow, on his
so
way,
it appeared as though he was just going through the motion,
right through the motion, because he was getting ready to leave. He was getting ready to leave at first, and that's when he came back. The black officer that was standing there, he didn't walk through. He said he just picked up his radio. I didn't hear it go off, and say he was spotted down by the ice house, and he left. But Stemridge didn't immediately left. You know, he was like, Miss McGhee, if your son comes in, tell him to turn himself in. And then he left, but it didn't seem like he was in any hurry to leave. That was weird.
And that's 2 or 3 hours later.
Right. This is probably about 6:30 then.
Okay.
Yeah, and matter of fact, I called about 15 minutes later. I called to see if they had apprehended him, and I got to run around like, man, we don't know where your son is, you know. And I'm like, you know, I went out to the area myself. My son came in, my daughter, and the three of us went down to the area. They said by the ice house, so that's where we went, which is on the other side of the bridge. And we looked in that area, and we crawled in the area. We called his name, and of course, there was no answer. And we looked at that area. We didn't come to this area because we were told that's where it was spotted. So we went home. I waited probably about 30 minutes, and I started calling the police department and asked them, was he apprehended? And their response were, they were very rude, stating that, man, we don't know where your son is. And I'm like, well, maybe you need to drag the river. Because I said, I walked that area by the ice house, and I put my hands behind my back, and Stemridge said he was handcuffed from the back. Maybe he fell in the river. I said, that's possible, but it was open. If they fell in there and they were chasing, they should have seen him. But he was very adamant about them not knowing where he was, and they didn't search him.
From the courthouse, the probation office, down to the river, City Hall, it just felt like we were sending a different kind of energy and vibe into this community. And our prayer, of course, is that it's strong enough and lit by divine source in such a way that it will continue to work in this community long after we're gone.
Now, how does this Macon experience fit into your overall mission to walk around America?
Well, it actually fits quite well. It's exactly what this walk is about. You know, Chief, I shared with you when we came back from our world walk and started our journey from New York back to Atlanta. We walked in communities in Baltimore, New York, and on down, where there were pockets of population that were experiencing so much oppression, and even beyond oppression. It was like people were just in a daze because of some of the things that are happening. And I'll give you a perfect example. We did a walk in a section of Baltimore City where there were 14 prisons. And something I learned about, that there are prisons inside of prisons. In other words, a prison may be built and parts of the prison on the inside are privatized and owned by such people as Donald Trump. And it just so happened the day we were walking through that community, a young man came up to us and said, well, what are you all walking about? And we told him, and he says, well, I got a story for you. I just got out of one of these prisons. And he told his story. And it impacted me so much because we always hear about criminalization of our youth. We hear about the violence, and the answer always seems to be, let's lock everybody up. What we don't hear about is that those young men and women who get entrapped into the system, who are criminalized, they have no opportunity for employment. There's no viable opportunities to bridge the gap of disparities between education, opportunity, health care, and so forth. And of course, the lure of the streets. Nobody stops to ask, where do the drugs come from? Where does the alcohol come from? Where are the guns coming from that enter the community and entrap our young people, and then becomes a vicious cycle in the criminal justice system? So his story also gave us the opportunity to look at, one, what happens to a community when the best of the best are snatched out at such an early age. I mean, we're talking young men specifically between the ages of 15 and 24. That's a major gap in any community when you just snatch that group out. And I'm not talking about whether they deserve it or not. That's not my issue. I'm saying if you set the playing field just right, anybody can be entrapped. But what I am also talking about is the devastation on the community and the insurance that future generations will also follow the same path. That's devastating, and it's fearful, it's inhumane, and sooner or later, that's going to create a bigger problem than anyone can imagine. The other part that he brought to our attention is that here was a young brother who had graduated from college, who actually was a physicist major, believe it or not, and got involved in drugs, and that's what was his demise. But he was saying now, with all his education, he's served his time, he's done everything he's supposed to do, he can't get a job because his record is not going to be expunged. And I'm not sure if that's the right word. But so you have all these brothers who can commit a crime at 18, and the ones who are really trying to get back on the road to do things well. And I don't mean just brothers, I should say brothers and sisters, because the fastest growing population now is African American and Latino women. But they could do a crime at 18 and then at 35 still can't get a job because that's on their record, or their opportunities for employment are limited because those records in terms of what they've done and paid for still follow them. And that's an incredible thing. So all of this conversation happened with 3 generations of members of that community. And it was so beautiful because you heard immediately the elder saying, wow, I never heard this side of the story. And then the young people saying, well, how do we keep from being this story becoming our story? And so we don't have the answers for the community, but as walkers, at least the consciousness was raised around the issue. They got to see it in a broader context. And my hope and my prayer is that once you do that, transformation can begin to happen. That was exactly what inspired that moment when we sat with that community and another community on on North Avenue in Baltimore, 10 o'clock in the morning, and people sitting out on the steps drinking already, having their 40s and drinking. But we passed this young group, this group of people, and they were having a ball. And they were drinking and having a good time. And we came up on them and they said, hey, what are y'all doing here? And so we told them, we've been walking around the world for peace. We're on our way home, but we want to walk through communities. And after our dialogue, they said, yeah, peace means a lot to us too. Mm-hmm. And I said, you know what? We've got to walk to raise the awareness in our country. And so what we say is this: we're walking to bring visibility to the invisible and voice to the voiceless, to open the heart of America. Well,
when will the kind of change that you hope for and pray for happen in your mind?
In my mind, I don't really look at governments and so forth to measure whether we're being successful in what we do. I can't remember who said it, but there's a statement that government doesn't change the world, people do. And so I look at the measure of our success being when someone in the community 3 months later contacts us and tells us what happened as a result of us being there. See, we're working on a subtle level of energy. So it's not about whether you have large numbers showing up to walk with you or all the press in the world. It's when you walk with a certain intention, you transform the ground you walk on energetically. And that's what we walk for, to transform the ground we walk on. And, you think about people who've fundamentally changed the world, they walked. Mm-hmm. I mean, even going back to our Christ story, Buddha going to Gandhi, Martin Luther King, and many, Fannie Lou Hamer and Harriet Tubman, because that's my heart. I believe that part of Harriet Tubman must be in my bones because I feel her so deeply. And what I also feel is that, when I think about Harriet Tubman and I think about Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and others, you reach a point on this kind of walk where you know that something in you has been transferred And that something in you isn't a personal ego thing, it's a God thing. And so you've done your work, because it's out there now, and it's going to just sweep and swell, and all of a sudden one day change happens. And that's all great leaders. Change just happens. And that's what we walk for, Chief. So, you know, I may not even see it in my lifetime, but if we can create enough stir in our people to lift their consciousness and lift the blinders off their eyes and awaken people to realize that we're in this together, like it or not, then we've done our job. We've done our job. And the other thing I want to say about that is, you know, so often, Chief, you know, the biggest thing that concerns me often is people say, you know, when we're out here and we might hit a hard time or something, and when I say a hard time, we might not be able to move as fast as we want to. We might have to stay longer someplace because we don't have the money. People say, well, you know, if it's not fun, you shouldn't be doing it. That means something's not right. And when I hear that as a consciousness that people hold now, it makes me think about all those ancestors who gave up so much for us. Suppose Martin Luther King decided it's too hard. You know, it's not fun anymore. Suppose Harriet Tubman, after she got her own freedom, decided, well, this is really what I wanted. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So we just have to keep going. You know, we have to keep going, and we have to know inside of us what's important, not what's outside of us.
Let me inspire you to keep on doing what you are doing, because I truly believe that what you are doing will be like wine. The longer you do it and the longer it's bottled and stocked, the better it's going to get as it ages. And children in the future everywhere will be able to draw from it and get that thrill of love, peace, and joy that I think you are searching for. Thank you, man.